So we all good. We start from this.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting so far how Amin is really using that kind of that laid back body position and carrying the front leg to really kind of impose himself on the space and keep Danylo out around the edge.
Yeah, I think the fact that in that smaller ring, I think he had the intentions originally of starting with that high intensity with the longer range on the kick, because as you can see, it's like it's a shorter one in the beginning, and then as he continues on his movement forward, it kind of extends the range, and as he's kind of making any close contact at all, it's quite a long kick, which is hard to read and hard to get the distance and the timing of. And in particular, so like if you're not used to that type of kick, it'll be very difficult to counter as well, which is generally Danylo's type of style, I think, anyway. So
I think Amin has the slight range advantage here as well.
Yeah.
I mean, although Danylo's really, really good at getting around a leg, getting that turning kick or the 360 in there, it's an extra long reach, so the distance has to be extra good.
Yeah.
I think we've seen Danylo's...
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say we've seen Danylo's first attempt at a counter reverse punch, and he hasn't read the side kick quite right, and he's caught it in the gut just a little bit there. I think if we're watching just after the restarts, you kind of see that the intention is there to catch that, the read is there, but he's not quite got the pickup of the leg right.
Yeah, I think like it's a strange one, because sometimes Amin, if he's carrying, he can bring that knee quite close on the first one, but then he kind of almost sometimes brings it like a side rising kick as well, doesn't he? Like that one there now that we just seen.
That floater.
Like, yeah, it just kind of like comes up in front and then it shoots forward. So it's hard to read the timing of that, because obviously Danylo needs to commit to going forward when he's counter-attacking to get that backhand in. So obviously that's quite hard to read if it's kind of like a floater one, you know.
It doesn't hurt when it lands usually, but it's just there.
They're not both going forward against each other as such, because it's just kind of that floating kind of emotion. It's a bit strange, like, you know.
We'll play it on a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I know the minus point's a bit controversial, but we'll move on past that section. It's quite nice actually, that combination. So Alamin's read the counter punch really well, but it's the follow-on. It's the break of rhythm where you might expect we'll go back and we'll bounce for a second here, and then he's right back in with a headshot and back to the hands again.
Yeah, definitely. I think the factor again of that smaller ring is massive, because Danylo he's kind of allowing Amin to get off. So he doesn't have any option here.
Yeah, I was wrong. It wasn't back to the hands again. It's back to the legs. So it's funny how that can happen. You watch something and you get that impression, because maybe it's something that you've practiced, and we go hands, legs, we go back to hands, and he's gone hands, legs, and back to the legs, just to his particular rhythm. You were saying about the smaller ring.
Yeah, definitely, because especially in a smaller ring, I see this a lot. Like, I don't think you have as much affordance to to kind of counter as casual, if that makes sense. I think you need to be a little bit more like playing a little bit more on the edge without retreating. So a lot of time when you want to counter, you want to kind of like suck them into that space. I don't think you have that luxury in that smaller, tighter ring. And Amin seems to be aware of that. So he's not really, he's always trying to be the first one to go. So any opportunity that he gets, he's trying to be the first one. And then if he can get that second shot after that again, he's laughing really, because he's getting the better of all those combinations then.
He's forcing Danylo to make his decision on mat earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. There's another sweet backhand.
You see, it's the same thing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's the same idea. It's whoever makes that initial attack has a massive advantage, just based on this ring size alone. By initiating, you already have a massive advantage, because there's only maybe like 1 or 2 mats max that they can actually go back further, which is not a lot of space for big guys at 85 kilos, you know. It's not.
And even there, where Danylo's initiated with a blitz and Amin's gone with the defensive side kick, but by the time he's got his feet back under him, he's out of the ring.
Exactly. So like judges probably won't score that anyway, because I'd imagine, I didn't look at it, but I'd imagine his standing leg was probably out of the ring before.
Yeah, I think it's just out of shot here. I don't even know if we can catch it, but we'll let it play on. It's just in reverse there. Danylo's giving him medicine there. So if you're sitting in the chair for Danylo, what are you looking to change?
I'm definitely looking to him start to initiate first. I think that he for a guy that's quite fast and quite sharp on his feet, I think that he could use that to his advantage to maybe set that up a little more. I'd like to see him maybe avoid going on the back foot too much, trying to suck in, because he's obviously quite used to a regular international size ring, so he's maybe expecting that extra little bit of space to be able to suck him into the space. So I'd be looking for him to maybe attack a mat earlier and maybe not leave Amin build that momentum.
Yeah, and if you were to give him something that he's done well in that first round, send him back in confident.
Yeah, I would definitely look at that last exchange or two there where he went forward and kind of got a bit of a squeeze on Amin and pushed him back. So now he knows that when he attacks, that there is a retreat coming there from Amin as well, where he's not always going to be met by a technique.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I think with Amin, where you're really looking at his strength, when he's testing and controlling the distance, when he takes control of the rhythm of the match, he can take control of the distance in the match. And he makes it very, very difficult, I think, then for Danylo to read his movement, to judge the distance well. But when he finds himself in the back edge of the ring, he's too long. Like he's so much space in his stance. He's too long. He doesn't have the ability to, as you say, take that half mat or 1 mat back to change the distance. So he has to counter. He has to directly counter on the spot, which just raises the pressure or the intensity of it. And so I think for myself, I'd be telling him to kind of forget about going to the legs for the counters, that he just doesn't have the range.
Doesn't have the space,
and to stick to the hands.
And I think it's actually funny, because I actually just did a post today about this as well, but just the fact of holding on the same spot when you're trying to counter, I don't think that's an option here. You know what I mean? You have to be kind of testing in and out, even when we say on the back foot as such. Even if you're waiting to pick off that counter, you still have to be that little bit active on the feet, because if you hold the same position, if they can get that small, tiny bit of momentum on you, you're screwed. You don't have any options really but to concede space.
Your first reaction to the movement is going to be to go back.
Yeah.
So if you're not drawing the counter, if you're not inviting the shot that you're going to counter, you're going to have to necessarily give up space. You won't read it instantly, and then you're on the back foot.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely like this one is a battle of who gets off first.
Yeah.
Effectively, who doesn't like give it a sloppy shot on their first one, who can get off first but in a good manner, you know.
Let's have a look at the second round. I think it heats up a little bit.
Yeah.
Just on that there, you can see where Amin has the center of the ring. It does give him that second option. He then has the option to retreat and use the legs to control the space, which with that long stance, that very balanced stance that he takes, he has the range to do that and to really control the space with that front leg. Mm-hmm. So I think the incentive is on Danylo now to invade his space a little bit. He's waiting, I think, for that right shot, isn't he?
Yeah.
So why do you think that one was so clean?
Say again?
So why do you think that shot from Amin was so clean?
The kick before the break.
Just here, the backhand.
Just go back to that one again if you can.
Right here. Anything you said up there that jumped out at you? Or?
Well, first of all, one thing that I was looking at is Alamin's front hand is inviting Danylo into that space.
Yeah.
So the minute he commits to it, and I think was there a little step?
Yeah, I think what he's actually done. Do you know the way sometimes when you're sparring against someone, you start to mirror their action, and eventually it's waiting to see who gets uncomfortable. And Amin had just stopped the movement in the match. Until that point, I think everything had been quite in and out, left to right. There was a good circular action, we'll say, around the ring, and it's been brought to a dead stop there where they're bouncing in front of each other.
Yeah,
and it's almost like, okay, you have the advantage if you go first of, well, the other person's reacting to you. But if you go without any preemptive movement, if you don't create some movement from you're kind of just stepping straight into it. I just felt like on that one, you've created this situation where we're bouncing, we're on the spot. There's not an awful lot of movement involved in it. We've stopped, and it's almost like impatience will get the better of you. You're going to go and carry your front leg in. It's very predictable. That's the answer. Or you go to hands. It's still the answer. I think Amin's almost just committed in his mind, like, that's my shot and I'm taking it, whatever comes. Yeah. But it looked very decisive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something to notice there, I think. I was just going to say, something to notice there is that lately I do find that if you're going to be scoring direct single shots, they need to be quite clean. A lot of before, I think single shots were scoring a little more, but from what I've seen in the last maybe 2 years, it seems that people who are on the front foot and maybe scoring their second or third shot seem to be rewarded a little bit more from the referees. I don't know, is that something that you've recognised?
Maybe not even as directly as you say it there like that. We'd always value momentum, and it's the kind of the idea of whether it's the follow-on shot or but certainly the idea of momentum, that, well, if you've worked really hard, you've gotten in there, you've got your score, your advantage, if you can add the cherry on top or the icing on the cake, then that's huge. And often the initial shot that gets you in isn't as clear as the shot that gets you out again, you know, the finishing shot.
What I think what I'm trying to say, I guess, is you kind of have to be a little bit luckier, I think, when you're looking for a shot on the back foot to be rewarded, as opposed to if a shot is 50-50, but if you're on the front foot, I think you get rewarded a little bit more, you know, if
human nature. Yeah,
if it's in doubt a little bit.
Definitely. But I think there was two interesting things there, and one of them is a phrase you used earlier, which was for Amin, is like he's got that really nice connection we were talking about earlier, and he went right back to the well, you know. So if you experience success with something, you'll often go back to the well and try it again.
Yeah.
And you know, he's done that, and he's followed up the reverse punch with a second one. But you can see then, as we said, once Danylo got a little bit of momentum behind him and he got a bit of movement going, he was able to follow through. And I think Amin gave him that by going back on that direct line.
Yeah.
And it's like every drill that you've ever done in a pad works as long as the other person goes back in a straight line. Yeah. So, but you know, all credit to Danylo, he exploded, like he went.
Once you get that front foot on them, where they're going back and for the second their balance is a little bit off, and you don't really have time to settle as such, it's quite difficult to set your foot in there to land anything to stop that momentum, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the linking shot that missed, throw him off his rhythm, and he keeps coming. Let's have a look at a bit more. Why do you think it's working now? Previously, like he had 2 attempts at that backhand early in the first round, and he was caught on the hip with that side kick. Why is it working for him now?
Yeah, I think the earlier, maybe he, as we were saying, he was leaving the person. Well, he was leaving Amin maybe get that first step, and then he was trying to counter him on the rhythm of the second one. But now it's interesting what you said a while ago of Danylo, maybe Amin, where he was just setting his mind that he was going to go with that shot.
Yeah.
With his own reverse punch. Remember the one that you addressed earlier? I think he's actually coming from a similar frame of mind, where he has it in his mind here that he's holding his ground, and once he comes into his space, he's going to hit him with that technique. And that's that. I think once Amin commits to that space, because obviously the hands are a little bit closer to get to a straight line than the kick, he's able to get off that quite easily. It's just that reading of the timing of it. I think at the beginning, maybe as I said to you as well, Alamin's side kick isn't what you like traditionally see as side kick. It can vary a lot, so it is different. Definitely hard to read, you know. But I think he it's a mixture of he's after reading the timing, and now he's also committed to holding his ground and going once that space is stepped into by Amin.
Yeah, and I think there's a change in the mental space for everybody. It happens to you. It's the last 10 seconds. Something has to happen the last 10 seconds. And when the scoreboard's gone level, well, then the question is asked to be, isn't it? It's like, are you happy enough to keep it that way? Yeah. Or do you want to be the one who nicks the point and wins it in the end? And I think we can actually see the scoreboard there, 2 seconds left and 2-2. So, yeah, And that finish is I think that once you get into those last few seconds and there's that little bit of extra pressure and challenge, it does also let people sometimes be a little sloppier. They don't, you're not setting up the shots, you're just taking what you see, whatever's on the shelf, you go for it. And I think that's when whatever is most instinctive, most trained, reactive in your repertoire is often what you'll go to under those pressure situations. So hope that when you're training and creating pressure on yourself in your training, that the quality is still there, because we're seeing some good reactions there. So do you want to maybe leave the outcome hanging in the air there? We'll leave the guy. I think for our discussion, we've probably got enough to look at and to talk about, and really to kind of focus on that counter punch or the counter to the side kick. And well, how are you going to go about developing that in a young competitor? With your green belts or blue belts, is there like the stepping up and dealing with someone who's got a rangy side kick?
Yeah. So I think once you cover the basic principles of using that technique correctly, is in the idea of it. Whoop. We there again?
We should hopefully be there.
Yeah. So basically, like as I was saying, the idea of like once you have the basic principles of what the people need to do, as in like the idea of like a car crash of the both coming together at the same time, and that creating the idea of, so a lot of time people with the reverse punch, they can start off maybe going backwards as they're trying to land it. I think that can be an area
absolutely
really falter. But once you kind of get rid of that baseline principles, and once you have the concepts down and people are aware of that, I think it's basically putting this into the practice of maybe a front leg side kick versus backhand. Keep it that simple at the beginning. I think the reason is because you get a lot of opportunities to read the timing and the distance for both people. And if you can mix that with a very varied partners and different sparring partners, it will be definitely beneficial, because we see here that Amin's side kick is kind of a little bit unorthodox, but very, very, very effective. And I think that getting those different looks in a real time is quite important, you see. For the reverse punch in particular, as we were saying, like the timing and the distance is so important. It's the whole perception of what you're seeing and what information you're taking in, whether that's consciously or subconsciously, So I think it's just being able to take in what's happening as a whole and analyze that and go from there, especially if you're trying to counter that side kick,
Yeah, and I think you kind of picked on a few of the challenges that I usually see if I'm dealing with yellow belts, green belts, blue belts, whoever it is, and we're starting to introduce that. One of the very first things you're going to deal with is the natural instinct to want to pull back or move backwards away from the shot, to let the side kick finish. And then, so effectively, we'd call that taking turns. And so when we're fighting against people taking turns, one of the phrases that we use is, you can take all the turns. So, and it's just, it's the very first part of the game. You get used to the idea that, well, your turn, my turn, and that kind of tit for tat kind of thing. And that we want to break into that logic of, no, there's no reason to give your opponent a turn at all if you don't want to. You can give them a turn if you want to, but you don't have to. So removing the option or trying to create some constraint around the backward motion or disincentivizing that backward motion is a big step. And getting people to feel comfortable with the idea of stepping through or stepping forward, and that being the better way to deal with it. We kind of take that principle, and so at the very, very beginning, like talking your white belts and yellow tags, we often start with like simple games that emphasize the position. So we give one person the side kick or the best approximation that they have the side kick at the time. And then we say to the other person, well, okay, if you can go to the open side and tag their belly, you get a point. If you can get behind them and give them a hug, you win. And then you change role. So then you get the side kick and the other person goes. And again, we can make it harder or easier by putting the person on their better or worse leg. You can change opponents. You can do all of that stuff. But you're not going to get a hug by moving away, because when you move away, you try to come back in, they have another time, attempt at the side kick. So we'll start with something like that often, just to get the principles of, where you'll need to position yourself, how close you might need to be. And then, as we saw with the guys there, a huge factor is the distance. So if you can force the person who's kicking to follow you, or to be in the space that you want them to be in, then your step forward shortens the space on them. Their side kick doesn't have room to lift. The foot doesn't arrive to the right position. It's not above your hip, and it's not going to meet your body as you go forward. And then it's a case of just, are you committed and have you an accurate punch? Mm-hmm. So, how can you incentivize teasing? Can you have it so that you have to get body to body without a punch? So we take the punch away, to emphasize that step in to getting into contact. Whether it's, again, the idea of the hug, maybe it's tagging the shoulder, maybe it's, tapping the back. Maybe it's just getting shoulder body to body so that you can actually close that distance, or indeed putting the punch into it, and you arrive at that situation where, both people are challenging each other, both can win. Because you never want to create a situation where one person is the pad.
That's the whole idea, isn't it? Yeah. Both people have a task and an objective. Otherwise, it's not authentic in terms of the distance, and things like that becomes fake. The distance, the timing. When you take turns, it becomes quite fake. You want real timing, real distance, authentic. It's 100%. Interesting. It's interesting as you say that there. I think because I think the front hand actually has a quite important job in setting up that reverse punch effectively. So you could probably look at maybe playing a little bit with the front hand to get you into that distance and into that contact space. So maybe, I don't know if you can use that front hand to, maybe we say, open the door as such to set you up for that backhand. I think might help people to get the idea of not going backwards, because obviously you can't make contact with your front hand, even if it's to the shoulder. Of course, that's not a scoring technique, but if you can just have your front hand make contact with the shoulder, I think that then should, that's your key in the door, and the reverse punch then should technically be able to make contact.
Yeah, that's kind of your focus on the distance. If you can reach there,
part, exactly.
With a hand, you're in the distance. Yeah, because the second, would say, problem, the expected error, the kind of the step in learning that you're going to expect is that as you start to coach this, people are going to naturally want to block the kick. You find this even when you're playing with turning kicks, even off the back leg, and you just want them to step through, and you're going, look, it's a round shot, it's going in a circle, and you're going straight forward. You can't get hit as long as you go forward, and they'll still try to block first. Then so it's the sequence, almost like, first I do this, then I do this, and your brain naturally puts that sequence in there because it feels logical, safe, whatever it happens to be. And then you're trying to encourage something else to happen. You're trying to say, well, no, blocking is like the last resort. Blocking means I didn't have a better idea. I didn't move. I didn't perceive what was coming at me, and so I didn't react. So I just flinched, in other words.
I think there's another part to that as well. I think if you have to block, your timing is incorrect. Because
100%,
because you have to block a leg where the foot is already up in the line of your body, which means you're too late. You need to go as the leg is rising up, so that's definitely a timing thing as well that I think will come in with that, because if that leg is in position that you need to block it, then the timing is incorrect. You're probably going to get hit anyway. Even if they don't score, they're going to hit you enough to push you back where you can't make contact with your reverse punch.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the most you want to see out of that front hand is almost the barrier to stop the leg rising. So, often you'll carry the front hand somewhere between your hip and your ribs that, as you step forward and the hand drops, it stops the ankle coming up. It stops it just traps it before it can come too far. And just by virtue of you extending your stance, going closer, you're getting lower, which again stops the leg coming up. But as you said, you go back to what do you need to be able to see that, to read that? Different opponents, different heights, different lengths of leg, right leg, left leg, and in different rhythms. And,
and different spaces too, I think.
Yeah,
as we just seen there, it does make a factor of how much space you have to concede and how much space you have to kind of like play with it. So maybe you can kind of like get a feel for the first one, they drop their leg and maybe they come again. You know what I mean? So maybe
yeah.
spacing as well is something that will affect that.
And it's one of those things that when you start teaching this in the beginning, you know, you might have been saying to people that, you know, you want to carry your front leg, you don't want to step foot to foot, you don't want to have a preemptive step before you do your side kick or whatever. And it doesn't make sense until someone can do something like this to you. Yeah. So until your opponent that you're training with is able to punish you for taking that step in. But then, like, almost consequentially, because some people will naturally take that step in with their back leg, it affords a learning opportunity to the person who's practicing this backhand punch, because, you know, they're now the ones that are readable. They're really easy to see. It's easier to get the timing right because there's something else for us to perceive. There's a whole extra extraneous unnecessary action that you can see that helps you read the kick coming up. So it gives you some of those early wins, those first few successes where you step through and you go, oh, brilliant. You know, I've got this.
And that's what we talk about when we always talk about chunking and information coming together in your head. That's the whole idea of you start to put these patterns together in your head. Oh, I see this. This is common. This is happening again. This is happening again. And that only comes from that real, authentic practice of having somebody trying to complete that task on you, rather than like if somebody's considered like a pad holder in the exercise, that it isn't authentic enough for you to read that information and to pick up on that information, as you were saying.
Absolutely. And even from the point of view of saying, well, if you limit it to, I want you to attack on your right side and I want you to be left leg in front, and, you know, we'll set it up like Amin and Danylo there were in the match, where you have a right-legged fighter against a left-legged fighter predominantly, and that sets it up in a particular way, because, you know, you're going to be stepping to blindside every time you throw this shot. Whereas everything then changes when sometimes it's a right-legged fighter, sometimes it's a left-legged fighter, and you go step into that, what you expect from your patterning, from the guy you usually train with. You expect to be stepping to a blind side and no reaction to it, or, you know, there's no counter shot. And then you do the same thing and you step open side, and all of a sudden you're getting these punches back in the face right away. You know, it gave you your entry, but it didn't give you the whole combination. And so they're able to fight back.
You definitely need that variability within the rep. I mean, it's one technique, but like they're like loads and probably unlimited amount of options to come off that, and like it's just so variable. So you need to really put yourself in that situation where you're experiencing everything it has to offer as such. So that, I guess that's what the idea with constraining is, though, isn't it? Like that you're constraining the environment to make that particular thing come up quite often, and that's the whole principle, like, isn't it?
And whether you go with the approach of, and I mean, this is the academics can bounce this one around forever, but whether it's the perception action coupling side of it, where it's almost subconscious, that you've had this information that's built up because you've seen it, you've reacted to it, you've tried your various solutions, you've found effective solutions, and it exists basically then as something that, like a trigger. Or it's the more game side of the cognitive side of it, where it's like you're starting to understand and break down the thing. You realize that because that step is there, because the left leg is in front, because the whatever, whichever approach you want to really go with, as you said, you go back to it, the constraints are what matter. It's how many times can we have this decision-making opportunity or this learning opportunity come up within a space and time.
And that lets us play on the head there. Decision making, like that's what it is. But whether it is that like decision where you're consciously making a decision, or whether it's subconscious, well, it's like that's still a decision.
Yes.
So by putting that opportunity and the ability to train in that type of environment, the outcome is still the same as such.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then really what changes after that is your ability to debrief afterwards, to talk about what you were trying, what worked, what didn't work, what you saw, you know, and that can be sometimes the difference of experience. You know, it can be how often have you sat down and watched your own video.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's always a game changer when kids get to the point where they're willing to sit down with the parents or with the coach and actually watch their own video and see, well, oh, do I really move like that? Is that what I do with my hands? Is that, and it's a game changer for them. So at that point, you're very much watching from that internal cameraman, and you see the world in terms of what your opponent looks like, or what your hand looks like when it's appearing in front of your face as you attack, and you don't see the whole picture. So I suppose it's definitely,
because I know from my own experience, like I probably can't remember I probably can't remember one full fight even 5 minutes later, because you're kind of so engulfed in the moment and so like in the zone that you kind of, things happen by themselves as such. Like you're not always making like active conscious decisions. Like I can tell you looking back afterwards, but in that moment it's just something just clicks, and that's kind of what we're looking for as well, for you to be able to make decisions on the spot, because you don't have time, I think, in 2 minutes at least to be adapting too much. Like you need to recognize something really, really quickly and act on it really, really quickly. You don't have time. It would be a different story if it was like boxing, where you have 9 rounds of 3 minutes or whatever, so you can sit down between rounds and say, oh, okay, this is not working, maybe we'll go about it this way. I think that it's quite important that you need to be able to adapt on the go and recognize things as they come,
especially because, as you say, the time constraint in our event is 2-minute rounds. You've probably only got about 45 seconds in between the rounds because of how it stops and starts. And, really and truly, you have an opportunity to get 2 to 3 comments from a coach and you're back in again. So
and most coaches are trying to give you a book as well, which doesn't help. They want to give you all the answers.
Okay. So if you were to kind of take a few takeaways from what we were watching there in that match and what the guys have done well, like we'll go back to that role of the coach, and if you're chatting with them after the match, let's say it finished in a draw, we're in a league format, nobody has won it. What are we telling them they've done well?
So I'm looking at Amin and telling him that he started really positive with a high intensity. Because I feel that talking about those time constraints, if you can get a certain lead, it can be quite hard to claw it back for the opponent. So starting off with that high intensity pressure and building that momentum and building and not really settling for the scoreboard as such. I think once you get a certain momentum there, like it can be very, very difficult for people to claw it back. And the more the time is draining down, the more pressure comes up on the other side. And then having the tools to, when that intensity rises, which it will from the opponent naturally, when they want to make a kind of intensity change, when they know that it's almost lost, that you can deal with that and not just back off and like succumb to that pressure,
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to say, like, if I was coaching Danylo there, I'd be really, really happy with how well he's responded to changes in momentum. And, in terms of he's reacted to being down in the score, and he's reacted to being level in the score, and his reaction each time has been to do something positive about it. He hasn't started to spar negatively because he's in a negative position, and when he came level, he wasn't content to stay with that. He was still fighting to go and get the win at that stage. So I think cognitively, or like at least in terms of what's going on in his head, he's in a very good place there. And I think as well, the strength of character and the strength of mind it takes to go back to a shot that you've tested against a fighter only 2 minutes before, and that got you caught, to be able to say, okay, I need that shot again now. I can go back to that shot, and then to get purchase out of it, to get traction out of it and go ahead. I think that's a huge positive. Like, I'd be very, very impressed with that.
Definitely. No, good fight, definitely, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's really engaging. Love a fight like that when you're at the sidelines.
Yeah, and it looks like to the people,
personalities in the sport as well.
Yeah, and if you look at it from the outside, somebody who's not probably like so high up with the level, they might say, oh, but there's only 3 or 4 techniques going and there's not much going on. But there's a lot of things happening there, as you can see, like from the amount we were able to break down.
Sure, definitely. All right, man. Enough for today.
Yeah, absolutely.